listening to the Garage Gardeners Radio Show, where we talk about extending the gardening season and pushing garden boundaries. We talk to creative gardeners and garden experts who share ideas about how to garden longer and grow plants you didn't think you could grow. Today's show has been pre-recorded. And now, here are your hosts, the daughter and father duo, Emma Biggs and Stephen Biggs.
Hey everyone, I'm Emma Biggs and thanks for hanging out with us today on the Garage Gardeners Radio Show. I'm a 13-year-old garden writer and speaker who loves growing tomatoes and other neat crops. I'm an extreme gardener who wants the garden season to never end.
Hey everybody, I'm Stephen Biggs. I write and speak about the food chain, farms, food and gardens, and I'm a fig pig. One of my favorite plants is the fig. I have lots of figs planted around my place here in Toronto and lots of other out-of-zone plants too. The challenge of growing figs in a cold climate helped me see how much fun the challenge of pushing garden boundaries is. Emma and I also think gardening is a great way to hang out together, and we're glad you're hanging out with us here today. Our show is all about extending the gardening season and pushing garden boundaries.
And talking about hanging out, we'd love to meet you in person. In 2019, we'll be speaking at Canada Blooms, the Peterborough Garden Show, the Stratford Garden Festival, and the Toronto Botanical Garden. And we'd love it if you drop by and say hi if you see us.
Where did we get the name The Garage Gardeners? Well, Emma and I use our garage to extend the seasons. She grows heat-loving crops on our garage rooftop, and I store dormant fig trees in our garage for the winter. Our garage helps us to extend the season and store tender plants over the winter.
If you want to read our gardening blogs, find out where we'll be speaking, or to see the cool stuff that we're going to try in our garden this year, visit our blogs. Dad's website is stephenbiggs.ca. That's STEVENBIGGS.ca, and mine is emmabiggs.ca. And while you're at it, make sure to check out the YouTube channel I have with my friend Ty from Pennsylvania. Our channel is called From Dirt to Dishes, and we talk about cooking and gardening for kids. It is episodes where I show you how to cook some neat veggies, and then Ty shows you how to cook what I grow.
On Instagram, you can find us hanging out as Garage Gardeners, and if you're tomato crazy, be sure to visit Emma on Instagram, where she hangs out as @EmmaBiggs_grows. If you've looked at our Instagram page over the past week, you might have seen a picture of Emma's mint garden and of Emma making some mint ice cream. A couple of years back, we were at our favorite herb nursery, Richters Herbs, to give a talk, and afterwards we decided to plant shop. Two extreme gardeners amongst a bunch of really neat plants. Well, you can imagine what happened.
And what actually happened was I came home with 19 varieties of mint. That's it, 19 varieties. When I went there, I didn't know that there were 19 varieties of mint. I thought that there was one. And I came home with chocolate mint, apple mint, pineapple mint, grapefruit mint, variegated Swiss mint. It was the most amazing thing ever.
But having done battle with bossy mint plants in the past, and they're not shy about spreading, I suggested to Emma that we might want to make a plan so that we're not always trying to contain this menagerie of mints. So we opted for a mint container garden, and you can check it out on Instagram. And as I said, we hang out as Garage Gardeners. Now, we like to talk about pushing garden boundaries in our show. Herbs give lots of opportunity to push boundaries, whether you're trying to overwinter herbs that aren't hardy, overwinter them as dormant plants in a place like a garage. And we do that with our salvias, for example. But you also might want to keep some herbs as house plants. When you think about it, growing a mint container gardening is pushing boundaries too, because otherwise, how else would you deal with 20 different types of mint in your garden?
Now, I know that Swiss mint was Dad's absolute favorite mint because of its very intense, minty smell and taste. And lots of kids visit our garden in the summer, and they were so excited about the varieties of mint. They could walk around, they could try the chocolate mint, the banana mint, the orange mint, and it was so much fun, and it got so many of the kids interested in gardening. Our first guest today is Conrad Richter from Richters Herbs. And as well as having a nursery that we all just love, he has been super supportive of me, giving me a chance to talk at his nursery. Now, I first saw a Richter's catalog when Dad brought one home for me from one of the garden writers' meetings. And as herb plants, seeds, books, dried herbs, and more. And they also sell figs, which makes Dad really happy.
You can visit the Richters website at richters.com, RICHTERS.com, and check out their video series, which you'll find under their Herbs TV section. And you'll find a bunch of really neat videos. I'm in there talking about figs in one of them and another in brugmansias. Our friend Joanne is also in there talking about rooftop and balcony gardens.
Now, in every show, we have Tomato Talk with me, Emma, and Bigs on Figs with Dad, the Fig Pig. Today, we have both of our segments in the second half of the show while we chat with the author, storyteller, and chef-turned-writer Signe Langford. Signe is the food editor for Harrowsmith magazine and has many fantastic food ideas. She'll talk about her favorite tomatoes for cooking and what to keep in mind while cooking them, and then she'll talk about figs with Dad.
But before we get to figs and tomatoes, Signe will tell us all about urban chickens and share tips from her fantastic book, Happy Hens and Fresh Eggs, Keeping Chickens in the Kitchen Garden. Our own copy of the book is made out to my wife Shelley, where Signe wrote, "I know you miss your ladies. Hope this helps a bit." And you'll hear a bit about our former chickens in the second half of the show. But in the meantime, you can check out Signe's website, Signe Langford, SIGNELANGFORD.com, and check out her book, Happy Hens and Fresh Eggs.
Now, before we bring in Conrad, I just have to tell you something very important. Now, this is that Dad kills our rosemary plants every single winter. We bought a new one last year and a new one the year before, and currently we don't have a live rosemary plant, so I'm excited to hear what we can do to keep them alive.
I can't believe you shared that on air. Emma. Okay, so, now Conrad Richter from Richters Herbs in Goodwood, Ontario, just outside of Toronto, is on the line with us now to talk all about herbs. Hi, Conrad.
Well, hello. Thank you very much for having me on. I'm happy to speak about herbs and about that rosemary that you're having trouble with.
Well, we're so excited to hear about how we can keep our rosemary alive because I just love it, and I think Dad does too, even though he doesn't know how to look after it.
Well, your dad is not the only one that has trouble with rosemary. It is one of the most common questions that we get. How do we winter, rosemary indoors over winter? One of the things that comes up many times is people start complaining about a powdery mildew that starts growing on the rosemary. I don't know if you've noticed that on your plants, but that is quite a common problem for rosemary. Not so much for some of the other herbs, but when the plant is inside and it doesn't get quite as much light, it is not growing as vigorously, and it's kind of slowing down its whole growing and respiratory system. So it's not. Rosemary doesn't quite go into dormancy like, say, your fig plants, where the leaves drop off, and then the next season it comes back. The leaves persist. It's basically an evergreen. But it does slow down, and when it does slow down, it becomes more susceptible to diseases, particularly, in this case, powdery mildew. So what happens is that eventually, maybe after a month or two after you've brought your plant inside, put it in your sunniest window, you'll start to see a little fuzzy, white powdery, markings on the leaves, and that's a sure sign of the powdery mildew disease, which is a fungus.
And that's what I've had, Conrad, for certain, as you're describing it. It's powdery mildew has been happening every year, I think, with my rosemary.
Yes, it's everywhere. You can't really prevent it from happening. You can't, for example, establish a place which is completely free of the spores. Because it's a fungus, the spores are in the air all the time anyway. So it's pretty much inevitable that you're going to get it. So what we've told people to do, and it does work to some degree, is to mix up a little homemade fungicide,
Mm-hmm.
which is made with baking soda and chamomile tea.
Mm.
Those two together actually seem to help, treat the powdery mildew. It's not a surefire solution, but it does seem to help in a lot of cases. So
And
that helps.
would that just be misted on the leaves then, the baking soda and chamomile?
Well, no, you would say make the chamomile tea, and then you would add maybe, it's not a specific formula, but you would add maybe let's say if you have a glass of chamomile tea, you might put in a half a teaspoon of baking soda or something like that. Just
Mm-hmm.
mix it up and then spray that on your plants, or if you make enough of it, you can actually dip the whole plant in it.
Okay.
So that can help. By the way, the chamomile is also effective for damping off disease too. If you're having that problem when you're starting seedlings in spring, when all of a sudden overnight seedlings will just topple over.
Mm.
So, and that speaks to a common property of many of the herbs that we grow, that we all love, in that they have many kinds of compounds present in their leaves, especially in the volatile oils. That is the oils that are released when you rub the leaves, and then that's how you smell the plants, because these oils are released from the leaves, they go into the air, and then you smell them in your nose. Your nose receptors pick them up and send a signal to your brain, and aha, I've got rosemary, I've got chamomile, I've got whatever the herb is.
Okay.
So those substances often turn out to be have all kind interesting properties. In a medicinal side, they might be antiseptic, they might be antibacterial. In the case of plants, they also tend to be antifungal, or they have pesticide properties present. So it's not surprising that a plant like chamomile would have a beneficial effect on something like the various kinds of fungi that plague plants, like damping off and this powdery mildew.
Mm. Well, so on that note, Conrad, that's making me wonder if the chamomile can be kept indoors for the winter, or what's a good winter strategy for chamomile if one wants to have a continual source?
Well, I'm afraid that chamomile wouldn't be one of the ones that you would want to grow, because the thing that you want with chamomile are the flowers. And the chances of getting chamomile to flower, first of all, just to flower, and then in the kind of quantity that you need to be able to use or make a cup of tea or something, is pretty much nil, I would say, inside during the winter months. So chamomile would not be one of my candidates for indoor growing during winter months. What we want to focus on are the herbs that you are going to use for leaves. Use the leaves of. You don't want herbs that you need the seeds from, because they're unlikely to flower and then set seeds. So that would eliminate, say, dill for dill seed, or fennel for fennel seed. You wouldn't try to do that indoors.
Okay.
But you would grow dill for the fresh leaves, for dill weed. You could do that. So that's a common limitation for herbs indoors. You will only want the ones that you could reasonably expect to get leaves from.
Okay. What about basil? Because I know last year my basil took forever to grow. I remember it was sitting at maybe an inch tall for so long. Maybe it just wasn't warm enough, but I want to start some plants now and keep them inside and keep them as house plants until I can plant them outside. Is it a good candidate for doing that?
Oh yes, certainly you can start basil early from seeds. They germinate quite readily from seed. The challenge is, though, that if you happen to have, first of all, basil doesn't really like doesn't like cool temperatures. So if anytime it's less than 10 degrees Celsius, 50 degrees Fahrenheit, you're going to have a problem with basil. Oftentimes, it will even go black on you. But even, warmer temperatures in around, 12 or 15 degrees Fahrenheit, centigrade, 12 to 15 centigrade, or up to 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Basil, it struggles under those kind of conditions. It really needs warm conditions. So sometimes when you're setting in your seedlings or your plants right next to your window because you want to get the brightest light possible, you also end up having cooler temperatures right there. So that might be one reason why your basil kind of struggles at first until the season warms up a little later on in spring and you're starting to get warm temperatures inside. Then the basil will start to take off. I don't know if that's how you've found it so far.
Yeah, well, I think it is the cold because I keep complaining to Dad. It's always so cold in the house, and I tell him, turn up the heat, and my feet are freezing, and so now I have a really good excuse for him to turn up the heat. It's because I need to grow my basil so that it looks nice. So...
Well, now that you know that the basil needs a little bit more heat, then maybe your parents will turn the temperature up.
Exactly. You heard that, right, Dad?
I heard that. Okay, we'll turn up the temperature. Now, what are some other herb ideas that we could share with listeners? So basil, dill, I really like those. What are some other interesting ideas?
Well, one of the big trends over the last 20, 30 years has been people wanting to grow cilantro, coriander, for the fresh leaf. And anyone who has tried to grow cilantro indoors knows that when you take the seeds, you sow them in a little pot, and then they sprout up, and then they often quickly just go right to flower, and they don't really produce a lot of leaves. And once you cut them down and take the leaves that you want, they don't regrow, and then you have to reseed them. So it's a kind of a hassle, and after people do it 2 or 3 times, and they kind of lose interest. So about 2 decades ago, we learned about a cilantro-like plant. It doesn't look like it at all, but it has a scent somewhat similar, sufficiently similar that you can use in cooking. It happens to be a Vietnamese herb. And we got that from a good friend of mine who is Vietnamese and who would take me around the Vietnamese shops in downtown Toronto, and we would go into the grocery section, the fresh produce section of these shops, and we'd see all these amazing herbs that I'd never seen before, and she would tell me the Vietnamese names, and there was this one that I swore it smelled just like coriander, and I took a few of those plants, brought them back to the greenhouse, and sure enough, they rooted beautifully, and since then we've been selling it as Vietnamese coriander. And the thing about this is that first of all, you don't grow it from seed. It doesn't actually produce seed. I've actually never seen it come to flower. So the only way to propagate it, and it's quite easy to do so, is by cuttings. And that's what makes it so great, because you can keep cutting this thing, and it will just keep growing. It's almost, if it were hardy in Canada, it might well become a weed in Canada, but it isn't hardy. And so as you cut it, it just keeps coming back, and you get a lot of wonderful, fresh cilantro scented and tasting leaves that you can use all winter. And it can tolerate the lower light of winter. Now, you have to remember that even in the brightest window, say facing south, facing east or south or west, the light intensity in the winter is only about 1/10 of that of a summer day outside. It's really low. It maybe when you look out, you think, oh, to your eyes it seems bright, but in fact, the amount of light hitting the plant is actually quite low. So you need plants that can tolerate a lower light level.
Okay.
And after all, this is not the same as growing houseplants where you're just happy to get a bit of foliage and maybe get the plant to flower. In this case, you want a lot of foliage and you want to be able to cut it down and you want it to regrow. So it needs, in order to do all that growing, it needs light.
Mm-hmm.
And so the plants that require higher light to do well become harder to grow inside. So a plant like Vietnamese coriander is fantastic because it tolerates lower light.
Okay. Well, I know that's another plant I'm going to have to pick up when we come and pick up herb plants this spring.
Indeed, yes.
Yes, I'm excited.
I wanted to tell you a little bit about some interesting things that we've noticed over the last few years about plants and how they adjust over years. When you think of a plant like, say, oregano, a Greek oregano, we know, I think many people know that there are different varieties of oregano, some that don't have such a great taste and others that have a wonderful spicy oregano flavor.
Mm-hmm.
It's important to get the right variety. But, for years, all you could get in Canada was the one that was really hardy, really easy to grow, but had very little flavor. And the really nice stuff, the stuff that, you would get from, say, Greece, it was really hard to get. And we spent quite a bit of time many years ago gathering seeds, getting seeds from Greece and trying them out in our greenhouses. And finally we came up with a variety that had a wonderful, beautiful, spicy oregano flavor. But the problem was that this darn stuff wouldn't winter over. It was the same species of that one that didn't have much scent, but it wouldn't winter over. It was really frustrating. But meanwhile, still, it was a great new introduction in our greenhouse, and people, bought it. But they basically treated it as a summer annual plant.
Okay.
However, a number of years ago, my dad just decided to plow up one section of the farm and throw in a lot of leftover seeds that were no longer germinating very well, and would otherwise have to throw it. He just seeded whatever he had left in that field, and just wanted to see whatever would come up and whatever would survive. Well, he passed away, but after a few years, I went and did a little bit of a walk, and of course, most of the area had grown back into their native plants, the grasses and the various other native plants that grow in our area. But I did find a patch of oregano, and it was the Greek oregano. And what was amazing about it is that it was not only hardy, and wasn't, it was defending itself against all the weeds and all the grasses and everything else. It was doing really, really well. And what that speaks to is that many of these plants have an enormous variability. There's a lot of genetic variability, and it is, in this instance, probably, a few thousand plants seeds germinated, and then almost all of them died. But there was one that managed to survive the winters and then thrived and started to spread, in fact, in this field. And it was just pure accident that I stepped on it and smelled it, and I said, "Wow, where did that smell come from?" That reminds me of being in Greece. You know how in Greece, just about everywhere you walk, he's stepping on a scented plant, and it's so
Yes.
magical.
Yes.
And I had that same feeling when I was stepping on this patch that was in this back field. And there it was. There was this oregano had formed, and that plant, it ultimately ended up becoming a new variety in our catalog called Profusion oregano.
Profusion. Okay.
I've seen that in your catalog, and now I'm going to take a note here, and I'm going to get it along with the Vietnamese coriander, and I'm going to come home. I'm not even going to try and guess how many plants I'm going to come home with this year. It's going to be a lot.
So, it's this is the kind of thing that I always try to tell, gardeners, that in your little garden, there's a lot of innovation you can do. These plants are happy to cooperate with you. You can do a little bit of breeding. You can do a lot of selection. You can do a lot of interesting things. There's enormous variability in them, that you can exploit. I'll tell you another little story. There's a plant that we brought back from my wife's country, which is in West Africa,
Mm-hmm.
and it's used for anxiety, for panic attacks, that sort of thing. And it's a really neat plant, actually. It is closely related to coleus, and we call it rescue herb. It didn't have a proper English name. It only had a Latin name and a local name in my wife's language. So we just decided, we'll call it rescue herb because that's what it seems to be used for rescuing people who are suffering from anxiety.
Yeah.
Anyway, we brought it to our greenhouse, and as you can imagine, a plant brought from the tropics would, come to Canada. Well, of course, it's not going to survive outside, but we tried to grow it over in the greenhouse, and it just barely made it through our winter. Now, our greenhouses are kept pretty cool, so they go down to about 10 during the really coldest part of the winter,
Mm-hmm.
or around 50 degrees Fahrenheit. And this plant just did not like that at all, and we swore the plant that we had almost died or did die, and but one plant somehow came back after a winter of that cold 10 degrees temperature, and then the next winter, well, it wasn't all that great either, but it did a little bit better. And now, 4 or 5 years later, this plant and all its successors that we've taken by cuttings is thriving in our greenhouse. It has somehow adapted. It has changed its genetic makeup somehow, I think, and it is now thriving in the greenhouse even over winter.
Wow. So there's that variability that you were mentioning, and you've struck upon a strain or a plant that has the ability to survive the winter.
Exactly. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and I think we tend to think of plants as some kind of static entity that of one specific genetic makeup, and it doesn't change. We have this notion that evolution is it happens over geologic time, let's say, over very long periods of time. But in fact, in a few short years, you can have changes in plants quite drastic, as these examples seem to point to.
Okay.
And I think that is why we're starting to see, for instance, some varieties of rosemary turning out to be a little bit hardier than others. Or in the case of figs, I'm sure you, Steve, know that
Mm-hmm.
there are some fig varieties that are now, now recognized as being more hardy than others. Like the Chicago hardy fig, for instance,
Yes.
which was grown in the Chicago area by immigrants for many years, and then perhaps over a number of years, that varieties developed to survive in that area.
Mm-hmm. That's a nice note for us to wrap up on, because we started out talking to you about rosemary, and that's leaving me with this idea that I can hope for a rosemary that maybe I can overwinter in my garden at some point and not kill them every winter.
That's right.
Well, Conrad, we're getting to the time where we need to wrap up, and thank you so much for all that great information about variability, telling us about the oregano, that one special oregano that grew through in your fields, and about the rescue herb. I hope we can have you on our show again.
Well, I'd be delighted to come.
It was awesome talking to you, Conrad. I think that maybe we'll have some living rosemary when we try again.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye now.
Okay, bye now.
That was Conrad Richter from Richters Herbs. Visit Richters Herbs website at richters.com. That's RICHTERS.com. And I really recommend that you watch some of their video series. If you look under Herbs TV, they have some fabulous videos. Now, as we get into the seed ordering season, I'd love to encourage listeners in Canada to visit seeds.ca. And it's the website for an organization called Seeds of Diversity. On the website, you'll find a listing of Seedy Saturday events across Canada. And these are events where people swap seeds. There's seed and garden vendors and educational talks. On the 9th of February, Emma and I will be at the Seedy Saturday in Niagara, Ontario. And for Emma and me, this event really is like family, with lots of like-minded people who love growing.
Now, our exciting news is that our new book, Gardening with Emma, comes out any day now. It's a kid-to-kid guide to growing cool plants and healthy food. Make sure to check out my blog at emmabiggs.ca, EMMABIGGS.ca, and that's where you can see my video about some of my favorite tomato varieties that I talk about in the book.
Okay, and well, talking about tomatoes, Emma is blogging for Harrowsmith magazine. Her blog is called Harrowsmith Kids, Emma's Tomato Patch. And in each post, she features one of her favorite tomato varieties. Unusual, fun tomatoes that are fun to grow in the garden. So you can visit Harrowsmith Mag, HARROWSMITHMAG.com. It's a great magazine. It's all about cooking, all about growing, and it's long been a favorite magazine of mine.
And I can definitely assure you that the tomato that I chose is a pretty neat one, that when I first came across it, I didn't know that a tomato that looked that way could exist. It was such a surprise, but such an amazing surprise. So definitely look out for that. Now, we were talking about herbs, and Dad mentioned the Hypertufa planters that we planted my mint in. And so in the book, we include a how-to page for making Hypertufa. And we had so much fun doing this project together that we thought, well, other families and other kids can have fun doing that too. So check it out on Instagram, where we hang out as the Garage Gardeners, and you can also see me making my mint ice cream. Now, Dad, do you remember when we tried making the Hypertufa and we made the forms out of cardboard?
Yeah, all I can say is if anybody's doing Hypertufa, don't make the mistake I made and make cardboard forms. You really want to use wood. The cardboard gets wet and shifted. I thought I could be smart, but our best result was using a pot-in-pot system, so one smaller pot within a bigger pot, and it looked great.
Now, while you're online checking out us under the name The Garage Gardeners on Instagram, make sure that you check out Dad's monthly newsletter. You can get it on his website, stephenbiggs.ca, and it has a Biggs on Figs section, Dad's obsession. You can check out Gardening with Kids, and a section on growing edibles.
Emma and I do lots of garden talks and help out at a lot of gardening events, and we always say to each other beforehand, if we get one person excited about gardening, it's worth it. This spring, Emma is giving 9 talks, so I hope that we inspire a few new young gardeners. You can hear her speak at Canada Blooms, the Peterborough Garden Show, and the Stratford Garden Festival. Drop by and say hi. Join us on March 4th as Emma and I speak at Toronto Botanical Garden about gardening with the younger generation. Emma is also teaching a course about growing tomatoes at Toronto Botanical Garden, and that's on April the 11th. So you can go to torontobotanicalgarden.ca if you would like any details on that. You're listening to the Garage Gardeners Radio Show, where we talk about extending the gardening season, pushing zone boundaries, and how to deal with garden zone envy. We talk to creative gardeners and garden experts who share ideas about how to garden longer and grow plants you didn't think you could grow. Emma and I want to bring you the Garage Gardeners Show more than once a month. We love what we're doing. We love sharing stories of gardeners who push boundaries. And you can help. If you enjoy the stories we bring you of people pushing garden boundaries, people growing things in cold climates, people growing in small spaces, and people gardening where other people just might not, then check out our page on patreon.com, patreon.com. You will find all of our past episodes there, and if you want to help us make more of these shows, you can also support us there. We're grateful for whatever support works for you, whether it's $2 a month, $5 a month, or $10 a month. For patrons who choose $10 a month, Emma and I will send you a free signed copy of our book, Grow Gardeners Kid-Tested Gardening with Children. Check it out and listen to some of our past episodes on patreon.com.
Me and Dad get to meet some pretty neat people when we hang out at the Garden Writers meeting. Now, last year, one of the people that I met was Ben Cullen, who is an avid food gardener. Ben and his dad, Mark, have a new book. It's called Escape to Reality, How the World is Changing Gardening, and Gardening is Changing the World. Sometimes when I get started on Instagram, it pulls me in and eats up a lot of time, because I just love looking at tomato and urban farming posts, and the electronics can really distract me. Mark and Ben say something neat in their book. Escape to Reality turns our attention away from the things that distract us, like tomato photos, and many of them electronic, and focuses our attention on experiences and lessons from the world outside four walls, many of them in our own yards. My garden is my escape to reality, so make sure that you look for Mark and Ben's new books in bookstores. Escape to Reality, How the World is Changing Gardening, and Gardening is Changing the World. You're listening to the Garage Gardeners Radio Show. I'm Emma Biggs, and thanks for hanging out with us today. I'm a 13-year-old extreme gardener and tomato lover who wants the garden season to never end.
Hey everybody, I'm Stephen Biggs. I write and speak about the food chain, farms, food, and gardens, and I'm a fig pig. Emma and I think gardening is a great way to hang out together. We're glad you're hanging out with us too.
Our second guest for this show is Signe Langford. Now, Signe is an author, a storyteller, and a chef-turned-writer. She is also the food editor for the Harrowsmith magazine that is so fantastically creative with food.
Signe will tell us all about keeping urban chickens and share tips from her fantastic book, Happy Hens and Fresh Eggs, Keeping Chickens in the Kitchen Garden. Our own copy of the book is made out to my wife Shelley, where Signe wrote, I know you miss your ladies. Hope this helps a bit.
And the photos in that book are just beautiful. The photographer, Donna Griffith, who shot the photos for my new book, Gardening with Emma, did the photos, and they were just amazing. When we were doing our photo shoot, Donna was really great about giving me photography tips, since that is something that I'm really interested in. Make sure that you visit Signe's website, signelangford.com. That's SIGNELANGFORD.com. And visit the Harrowsmith magazine's website, harrowsmithmag.com.
Now, if you're wondering how chickens fit with our focus of pushing garden boundaries, it's simple. They're not legal in most wards in Toronto, and Toronto may have a world-class food scene, but it has an underground chicken scene. People keep it quiet when they get chickens. Just this past week, my neighbors Rob and Sue had a visit from an inspector. They got busted. Apparently a neighbor was feeling disturbed by them. But having kept chickens, I know that they're far quieter than yappy dogs, and certainly they're far quieter than all of the construction I get to listen to in my neighborhood. Yet, they're verboten. I first met Signe when she was writing a story for Toronto Life magazine about the network of underground chicken keepers. And at the time, I was part of that network. And all I can say was that we had a very fun photo shoot because we had to disguise our faces. I remember a picture being taken of me holding a chicken, and I was wearing a duck mask at the time to disguise my identity. So I've had a lot of happy conversations about chickens with Signe, and we're delighted to welcome her to the show. Hi, Signe. Welcome, and thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me, and I remember that photo shoot fondly too. Everyone had masks, and yours was hilarious. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to send you a link to that story because it's still live on the Toronto Life website, and you can link it up on your website so that everyone can see you holding on to one of your ladies in your ridiculous duck mask.
I haven't seen that photo, but I have to see that.
Oh, you have? Oh, well.
Oh, yeah.
I think it should be blown up big on the wall. It's a keeper, that's for sure. And, things have changed a little bit in Toronto, right? I mean, you guys, I moved out of Toronto in the last year and a half, but, you have 4 wards where they're giving it a go with a pilot project.
Yes.
But I think it's ridiculous that they should be suspending any enforcement just for this period, because I'm fairly confident that it will be a bylaw will be written to make it allowable across the town, the city, the municipality. Eventually, Toronto needs to get on board with what you were saying about how yes, it has a world-class food scene, but that's really at the restaurant level, and that's great, but we don't, I think we're working toward, but we do not yet have in Toronto a world-class, local, and sustainable, at the ground level food scene. And that's what we need to work towards in the way that they're doing it in some cities that I can think of that are doing a great job of it, like, say, Portland or something, right?
Yeah.
And that's where chickens come in as being a vital part of that local food scene at the garden level.
At the garden level. I really like that. Yeah, that is so true. Well, I know that you lived right downtown Toronto, and so you were in a very dense neighborhood, and you had chickens there. Tell me what that was like.
Well, it was fine. I mean, I lived in a typical Toronto backyard in Leslieville in the East End with a postage stamp front yard, so the girls were never out front. My backyard was a bit of a bigger lot than a lot of itty-bitty urban lots, but I was still flanked on the sides and the back with neighbors. I had neighbors there that didn't even know I had them. The myth that everyone thinks they're stinky and noisy, that's because they've heard roosters. But you don't have a rooster, and you don't need roosters to get eggs. That's a myth. Also, the idea that they're stinky. Well, if you have, 3 dogs and leave them in the backyard and never clean up after them, that's going to get pretty stinky too. It's about being a good animal keeper. In the same way that, if you have dogs or cats, it's important. It behooves you to be a good pet owner. End of story. And you can keep chickens well, or you can keep them badly. A lot of people toss out, but what about, animal welfare? What about when you get, like, some guy who's abusing his chickens in the backyard or whatever? Well, first of all, if you've not seen inside a factory where the chickens are kept 7 to a cage, that's abuse. So I say any hen living in a backyard, even if it's not a Cluckingham Palace like my ladies have, it's better than a cage in a factory. So there's just so many. I think people ultimately are just afraid of change, just afraid of things that are different.
Yeah, a fear of change.
Listen, Emma, you mentioned about Harrowsmith, which I am the food editor at, but you forgot to mention that you are one of our newest bloggers.
Yeah.
So, are you excited?
I'm thrilled. I can't wait.
Good. I'm looking forward to it. We just edited your first piece. It'll be going up pretty soon. And of course, your thing is tomatoes, eh?
Of course.
chickens like tomatoes, and
Oh.
that's the trouble. Is they'll help you in the garden
Ah.
in more ways than you may want them to necessarily. I would go out and I was just waiting for this tomato. You know, you're watching it, ooh, almost ready, and then in the urban garden, you're like, I could wait one more day until it's perfect, but you know that'll be the morning the raccoon comes. So it's just terrible, and you don't want to take it off the vine earlier than you need to. But I would wait, and then I'd go out, and there'd be like the bottom of it eaten by a chicken because they could jump and get to the bottom of the tomato. You
So
know,
they're
you're
a bit like
"Damn."
little brothers.
But I'll cut that off and carry on. I don't mind. I'll share with the ladies. But yeah, they do like a tomato sometimes too. But I do believe chickens are really great gardening buddies. Even if you end up having to share your harvest with them a little bit here and there, you know? They
Yeah.
eat pests. They give fertilizer, and I'm really sorry to hear that you don't have your chickens anymore.
We still have the coop, and I tell you, the family is putting the pressure on me. So we'll wait and see.
You know what? I say, and you know, maybe I'm a bit of an old lady rebel, but I say be the change you want to see in the world. If you want chickens in the backyard to be a reality, get chickens and put them in your backyard, and let the chips fall where they may, and take the fight. Take the fight. I've taken it on in Port Hope because I moved from Toronto to Port Hope only to find that I had cranky neighbors here too. And we're going to work to change it because it's vital, and it's all part of knowing where our food comes from. And something like what Emma's doing as a kid, you know, in the garden, I totally get it. I was gardening by the time I was 4. I've got photographic evidence of me transplanting in my little plot when I was just barely out of being a toddler. When you do it young, it stays with you for life. And I think if kids can garden, if kids know where food comes from, they are going to be so much better equipped to deal with, not to be too much of a Debbie Downer, but what I think is the coming, you know, difficulties with global warming and climate change and extreme weather.
Well, so on that note about making change, what have you seen in the underground chicken network or above ground chicken networks in Toronto and in Port Hope that is a good way to get people thinking seriously about changing bylaws and discussing the issue?
Well, I think like what I was just saying, there are more and more people just doing it anyway. And once they're doing it and being a living example of it, then you can say, well, I've been doing it for 10 years. Come and see what I'm doing here. And, you know, the other day I invited a counselor over. She came over, and we stopped outside my gate, and I said, now stop. I want you to breathe in deeply. Do you smell chicken? Do you smell manure? Does it smell like a barnyard? She's like, no. I said, listen, do you hear anything? No. All right, let's go out. Let's go in now. Let's go into the coop now. Let's go. And I said, now take this chicken and hold it and sniff it, and nope, smells like pine shavings. That's right. So it's about doing it and then letting the naysayers or the nervous people experience it, and then, oh, okay, well, maybe that is okay after all. But as long as it remains a mystery and people can't experience it, I think it's going to be harder to get the lawmakers to get on board. That's why I say be the change you want to see in the world. Just do it and take it from there. And that's what I'm doing here in Port Hope. And I'm making headway. I'm dealing with counselors. I'm inviting them over one by one to come and see. I'm sticking my neck out for the cause, you know, but it's important. It has to change. Kids and people need that connection again with where food comes from, you know. I mean, you hear about this nature deficit disorder. Well, Emma, you won't be suffering from that because you've got your garden. But kids who just live with just technology, I think they're missing out on something huge. Don't you agree?
If you've never had fresh tomatoes or played with a chicken, you're sure missing out.
Yeah, I really think so. I think so. Yeah, so I think hopefully, now Harrow Smith Jr. is new for us, so we're hoping to get a whole new generation interested in all those things that Harrow Smith is about, gardens and farming and animals and nature and bird watching and all of that, and being a good resident of planet Earth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now, Signe, I want to ask you a bit about tomatoes because, of course, I have to do that. Now, with everyone I talk to about tomatoes on the show, the first question I always ask is, what is your favorite tomato variety?
Yeah, I don't think I've met a tomato I didn't like, but I would say, except for those ones that you sometimes find in the middle of winter in a restaurant when you order a salad, and it's some color that's vaguely pinkish, and it's rock hard and tasteless. I don't even call that a tomato, though. I don't even know what that is. But I love cherry tomatoes. And I love cherry tomatoes of any sort, really. The cuter the better. Those little itty-bitty ones that look like, more like blueberry size. They look like itty-bitty little rubies, little jewels. They're so gorgeous. I find cherry tomatoes, whether they're the bigger kind of pear-shaped yellow ones, like teardrop. Oh my gosh. They're so sweet, so tasty, so juicy. They don't ever tend to get mealy the way some tomatoes can, get that terrible gritty texture in the flesh that I just can't abide. But a cherry tomato is usually just an explosion in your mouth of cherry tomato juice and sweet, and I'm salivating.
That is a good choice.
I love them. I love them for eating because they're so easy to. You're in the garden, you're working, you're pruning, and then you see a couple and you snack while you're in the garden because they're right there and they're ready. I think that's lovely. I love them, too, as an ornamental. I sent you a photograph. You can put it on your website. I plant cherry tomatoes in my front door urn. They are beautiful as an ornamental, too. So, and they work so beautifully in containers. That's another thing that's so great about them. Yeah. They handle being in a pot beautifully. You got to keep it nice and wet, of course. They dry out. But I love doing a pot with a cherry tomato in the middle, and one that really grows tall and goes all viney, and say some nasturtiums draping, cascading down around the sides, and some beautiful varieties of oregano and basil in the pot underneath the tomato, and then maybe some morning glory crawling up the tomato cage that I put around the cherry tomato, and you have the most beautiful planter full of ornamentals and edibles.
Well, Signe,
so definitely that would be, and they're great for cooking with.
Yeah. I'm looking outside at the snow and I'm thinking, I love the snow, but I really miss seeing, not that green grass, but those beautiful tomato plants and nasturtiums. And, you're making me so hungry, too, just thinking about that.
This is the time of year when we all start getting a little squirrely because we've had enough, and we can start feeling the sun again, right? And we're like, oh, it's close. So close, I can taste it. But now you got to get the catalogs and start dreaming and scheming and planning. But yeah, I'm already thinking about the tomatoes that I want to do, and of course the ones that have like incredible colors, like those black tomatoes. There's just so much available to us again now. It's wonderful.
It is amazing.
But yeah, that's my tomato thing, and of course, tomatoes and basil, when they're at the height of their season, all you need to do is slice that tomato, rip some basil leaves, drizzle it with some good olive oil, and,
nothing
salt
beats
and pepper.
that.
You don't even need the cheese, but hey, if you've got some beautiful fresh mozzarella, it's just the
That's
the best
my
thing
all-time favorite type of salad. I could eat that breakfast, lunch, and dinner all summer long.
Absolutely. It's so good. And also, there's just so many different varieties now, right?
Yes, there are. I grew 133 last year, and
Wow.
I know someone who grows hundreds. If I had that much space, I'd be growing thousands if I could.
Oh my gosh, it can get a little obsessive, can't it?
Yes, it definitely can.
Now, that one that you wrote about for your first blog that will be up in a little while for Harrowsmith, say the name. It's German. Say it again.
It's called Richttomat.
Richttomat. That is the craziest looking tomato I've ever seen. I've never heard of it before.
I've heard someone describe it because it looks like a brain.
Ugh, it's not. Yeah, it's a little on the creepy, ugly side, but fascinating too, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
There's another one that's interesting in a sort of anatomical way. The oxheart. Have you planted that?
I grew it last year, but it got cut off by a cutworm.
Oh, see, now this is where the chickens would have been handy.
I know.
Because they will go through between the rows and they take care of all the pests.
Yeah.
And speaking of like tomato health, there's something that I wanted to mention to everybody because it's really important. Tomatoes love calcium, you know that, right? They're kind of calcium pigs,
yeah.
And they need it. Otherwise, you can end up with your blossom end rot, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what I like to do, and this is where chickens come in handy again too, is I like to use the old eggshells and use them as little seedling pots.
Oh.
So I'll save my eggshells and try and break them carefully when I'm making something and have nice proper half eggshells. Put the potting soil in, or put the seeds in, and start them at the windowsill in old eggshells.
Wow.
Then, when it's time to put them outside, well, you do your hardening off and all that, but then when it's time to transplant them into the garden, you don't need to, it's like a peat pot. You don't need to take it out. You just tap the bottom of the eggshell, so it's easier for the roots to push through, and put the whole thing in the ground. So, two benefits. You're not disturbing the delicate little roots on those seedlings. They don't like being messed with. Secondly, your tomato plant has its very own calcium supplement all season long.
Wow, I really got to try that. That would be so cool.
You totally have to. It's the cutest thing. I also sent you a picture of that so you can show your listeners what I'm talking about.
And if you get, I guess, if you have eggs that are different colors, like the greeny and bluey hued ones, that would be beautiful.
It's so pretty on the windowsill.
Yeah.
And you can just use, an old egg carton to hold the little seedlings in their shells, and then put under that a tray or something so you don't muck up your windowsill. But it's great. Or you can start them on top of the fridge where it's warm, right? Get the seeds going, and it's a great way to be green as well and reuse.
That's great. Well, so I won't let Emma hog all of your time with
Seriously,
tomatoes.
we ought to talk about some figs,
We
right?
got to fit in figs in the kitchen.
Yeah, figs in the kitchen. Now, I wanted to make a public confession. I am not a fan of the raw figs you can get at the grocery store. Now, I suspect that if I were, say, in, I don't know, some souk in Morocco or something, and I had a fig, I'd probably love it.
Yeah.
Or maybe even, in Sonoma Valley or something, right? I'd probably love the figs that come off the tree.
Dead right.
The ones in the grocery store, not so much. But the way to salvage them, for me, is to cook with them. And then cooking brings out the sweetness and all of the stuff that's, I think, lost in transport and commercial growing and harvesting when they're too young and all that stuff,
I love that word salvage. It's so appropriate.
It is, for sure.
Yeah, so I have a couple of recipes I'm going to share with your readers. I've sent them to you. You can post them. Figs that I bake, and one of them, I love how easy it is to prepare figs. Use your scissors and snip the pointy end, and it opens up like a beak. It's kind of neat. Then you can stuff it with goodies. So I like figs with, the flavor of figs go well with salty things, like bacon, nutty things, peanuts, ground other nuts, almonds, sweet things. They're just beautiful with honey or maple syrup, fatty things. Figs in the oven love olive oil, and they love butter. They love rich cheeses, figs and brie, figs and goat cheese.
You are making me so hungry.
Sorry, it's well, it's almost time for an afternoon snack. Tahini, they love tahini. So I've given you a couple of recipes that you can look at and your readers can look at for making stuffed figs that I stuff with bacon and ground nuts and some tahini and drizzle with butter and maple syrup, and walnuts. It's really nice. You can make it vegetarian too. Here's a great tip if you want to do vegetarian. When you need to take out bacon from a recipe, substitute smoked almonds.
Smoked almonds instead of bacon.
It's that smoky flavor that makes you think bacon.
Okay.
And you can get away with it. That's one recipe that's fantastic. Another thing I like to do is bake a cake, like an upside-down cake. Remember, that old vintage cake with the pineapple and the cherries, and you pour the cake batter on top? Try it with maple and whole figs or halved figs. Put them at the bottom, and then pour the cake batter on top. Oh, it's so beautiful when you turn it over.
Oh, that sounds
good. And the
good.
figs are looking up at you, and they're just caramelized and gorgeous. Try that, and I've posted both of those recipes, so you'll be able to give that a whirl.
I'm trying not to drool on the microphone.
I'm not even trying anymore. It's just the phone. You can clean the phone. It is very yummy, and I am hungry now.
Okay.
I hear you.
So we'll post
sure.
those on the page for the radio show on stephenbiggs.ca. And those sound so good.
Well, listen, Steve, I want to ask you a question about something. Two things. Two things. I fell for it a couple summers ago at one of those big box will remain nameless nurseries attached to a grocery store that shall remain nameless. And I fell for it. I bought a couple of those hardy figs.
Ah.
They were not hardy.
Yeah.
So what's going on there? Is it hardy in quotes and I still have to bring it in?
Well, I know the plants you mean, and I think the simplest thing to say is that it's hardier. And I have a friend who was growing one of those down by St. Catharines, and he got away for a couple winters without in any way protecting it. But then we had another winter and it died. So I think hardier is the better.
Semi-hardy.
Exactly.
Okay,
exactly.
Good to know.
But here in southern Ontario, not fully hardy.
No. Okay, tell me this too, and I don't know if you've already covered this or not, but I find it fascinating that a fig is an inside-out flower. Am I right?
You're right. It's like an inside-out flower is how I've had a botanist describe it to me.
Yeah.
And I couldn't name all of the parts for you.
No.
But it's an inside-out flower. A syconium, I think, is the botanical
It's so crazy, right?
It's crazy.
I didn't even know that. I'm learning something.
Because it's the coolest thing ever. But, I do love that crunch of all the little seeds.
Oh,
it's so good.
It's so good.
And I had a sticky toffee pudding once made with figs instead of dates.
Oh.
That sounds good.
Oh, it was so tasty, and it still had that rich sweetness, but you got that constant snap, crackle, crunch of the little fig seeds. It was really great.
That texture in your mouth is just lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so we're getting to the time where we need to wrap up, and I'm really excited about those recipes. We're going to post those on the website. And Harrowsmith Kids, Emma's Tomato Patch.
Harrowsmith Jr. is the name that we've settled on. So it's Harrowsmith Jr., Emma's Tomato Patch, and first blog will be all about this journey. What's the translation? The Journey Tomato or?
Yes, it's called the
Tomato?
Traveler's Tomato in German and the Journey Tomato in Spanish.
Okay.
Fantastic.
Well, thank you very much, Signe. And
thank you guys. It's so exciting what you're doing.
We're having so much fun doing it.
And hopefully we'll have chickens by the next time we talk to you.
I think you had just better be the change you want to see in the world.
I should word that differently. I should word this, Dad, we're going to have chickens by the next time we talk to Signe.
Dad, we're going to be the change we want to see in the world.
Thanks, Signe.
All right. Thanks so much, you guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Well, the Garage Gardeners radio show is just about over for today. I hope you've enjoyed the show. Remember to watch out for Emma's blog in Harrowsmith magazine, coming out Wednesday, the 13th of February. And check out Emma's YouTube channel, From Dirt to Dishes.
And visit Dad's website, stephenbiggs.ca, for the blog in fig growing tips and some of the recipes from Signe on the radio page, and sign up for his monthly newsletter and get fig growing tips and other ideas. And follow us on Instagram as we hang out as the Garage Gardeners, and you can find me as EmmaBiggs_grows.
We'd love to meet you in person in 2019. We'll be speaking Canada Blooms, the Peterborough Garden Show, the Stratford Garden Festival, the Toronto Botanical Gardens, and we'd just love it if you drop by and say hi. You're listening to the Garage Gardeners radio show. I'm Stephen Biggs.
I'm Emma Biggs. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you for listening to the Garage Gardeners radio show with your hosts Emma Biggs and Stephen Biggs, right here on Reality Radio 101.